I enjoy history, and because of that, I've noticed a trend of schools being dumbed down from what they were before. We've probably all seen the various memes that give tests that fifth graders in 1850 had to pass and similar things like that. But the most noticeable area, in my opinion, is the fact that logic is no longer a required subject in school. It was phased out pretty much around the World War II era, and I believe largely caused the intellectual vacuum that enabled the 60s to happen and has continued on up through today. What seems pretty clear looking back on it is that getting rid of logic was designed for two main purposes. And make no mistake, this was designed. First, when logic was abandoned, along with it went the ability for people to spot logical fallacies, particularly the informal fallacies, which pretty much are the entirety of all political discourse in America today. Every news article you read, and especially any media you watch on TV, are nothing but a string of non sequiturs designed to invoke a specific emotion in you, which is the second point. Once reason is abandoned, all we have left is our subjective opinion, and subjective opinion is as solid as the atmosphere. Truth has become based on feelings, and your feelings can change in a matter of seconds. Indeed, there's even an industry entirely devoted to giving you happy pills to stave off depression. Because we all know that people who are depressed will often seek to harm themselves, not for any objective truth, but because they feel like they don't matter or are worthless. And that's the problem when you take away reason, when you ignore logic. All you have left is emotional truth. And if truth is based on emotions and you feel like you are worthless, then there's no reality that can push through that malaise. How bad has it gotten? Well, it's gotten so bad that the American Psychological Association in January of this year released guidelines on helping men, and they literally say in it, quote, "The main thrust of the subsequent research is that traditional masculinity, marked by stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression, is, on the whole, harmful," end quote. Now, what reason do they give for this? They point out, quote, "Men commit 90% of homicides in the United States and represent 77% of homicide victims. They're the demographic group most at risk of being victimized by violent crime. They are 3.5 times more likely than women to die by suicide, and their life expectancy is 4.9 years shorter than women's. Boys are far more likely to be diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder than girls, and they face harsher punishments in school, especially boys of color," end quote. Now think about this. The APA has decided that these bad statistics are a result of, quote, "traditional masculinity," end quote, and they begin their definition of traditional masculinity by saying that it is, quote, "marked by stoicism," end quote. Now clearly they cannot be using the term stoic in the philosophical sense here, but even taking the colloquial term that emotions should be suppressed, just what does the APA think has been taught for the last century? That men should hide their feelings? Or that men should express them? For anyone paying attention, it's clearly the latter. We've been taught for at least 5 generations that men ought to speak up more, cry in public, be more feminine, etc. It's in every TV show, every movie, every book, every magazine, every therapist's office. I mean, for that matter, just look at how many men are in therapy today. This is clearly not a society that is steeped in stoicism. We are quite the opposite. We are a society drowning in emotions. The fix for that is not to do more of what led us to this situation. No, we do not need to abandon traditional masculinity. We need more of it. Look at how many boys are raised only by mothers today and compare that to how many boys get a masculine influence. Do you think that might be an indication of the problem? Maybe? How many school teachers are men compared to women? Don't worry, I'll tell you. The Bureau of Labor Statistics helpfully conducted surveys that show us in 2017, men accounted for 2.3% of preschool and kindergarten teachers, 20.7% of elementary and middle school teachers, and a whole 41.5% of secondary school teachers. Men also accounted for 11.5% of teacher assistants and a whopping 6.3% of childcare providers. Tell me again how kids are being too highly influenced by masculinity because men don't have a majority in any of those categories. The BLS statistics on that site that I was looking at went clear back to 1995, and in no year were there more than 45% of men in any of the categories. And the highest category was always the secondary school teacher category, not the young kids. So for the last 25 years or so, there have been more female instructors guiding the development of boys, and I would wager this is true at least since before the 80s. It's not boys being given traditional masculine teaching that is the problem. It's women who don't understand masculinity trying to tell boys how they ought to behave that is causing the issues. But let me get back to my main point. First, we got rid of logic in school. Now, why is that? I think that it might have something to do with the majority female teachers that our school system has. It's not because women can't be rational or can't understand logic, of course. They're perfectly capable of doing so. But the stereotype that men are more logical and women are more emotional came about for a reason. It's the same reason that if you allow women to freely choose whether they will go into a STEM field or into a liberal arts field, they will overwhelmingly choose to go into liberal arts. It's not that they can't do math, it's that they prefer not to do math. Likewise, logic, which is so closely linked to mathematics in the abstract, is not going to be a topic that most women prefer to think on. Consequently, it's going to be more difficult for them to teach the subject. And as a result, it's a whole lot easier for them just to drop it completely. And what happens when you drop logic? You have to replace it with something, so you replace it with your feelings. Truth has to be grounded. And if you get rid of objective reality, then all that you have left is your subjective preference. No longer are we concerned with whether or not something is actually just. Now we are concerned with whether or not something is fair. It's not fair that Billy was born into a wealthy family while Susie was born into a economically disadvantaged family. We will feel better if we take some of Billy's privilege and give it to Susie to balance it out. And thus we have modern America in a nutshell. Now, it might surprise some people, especially since I've come out as MGTOW, but I would love more women to get into a STEM field. Not just women, but everyone. Especially computer science. Why? Because when you program a computer, it doesn't give a fig about your feelings. If you don't type a line of code correctly, the program will crash, period. If you set up your loop wrong, your program fails. End of discussion. You either do it right or you fail. There's no arguing with reality. Reality is real. If more people had to program a computer before they could graduate high school, while it's not as good as having an actual logic course, at least it would prepare students for the fact that your emotions do not change what exists. The truth doesn't care about your feelings because the truth is actually objective after all. Everyone knows this, that the majority of people try to pretend it is otherwise will not alter reality. And in the end, reality always wins. Far better for you to base your thinking, and therefore your actions, on something that is always true than on fickle feelings that can change depending on if your favorite sports team won this week or not. And you'll find that once you ground your thinking in reason, using logic, that everyone can understand, even if men may be more adept at it, everyone can get this. Then you will not be manipulated by the media and by the politicians as easily. And that's what fills them with fear. Because if you know how to think, they have a harder time deceiving you. If you only know how to feel, well, Hollywood has perfected how to make you feel whatever they want you to feel. Your emotions are not bad. People know how to manipulate them, though. And that is why it's to your benefit if you engage in, wait for it, stoicism. Stoicism does not reject emotions. It seeks to evaluate them logically. Emotions are perfectly valid for what they are, but they are not guides to reality. They do not show you the truth. More often, they obscure the truth. And this is why propaganda always focuses on emotional responses and never on factual data. This is precisely why the APA is now fighting against stoicism in men, because men who can rationally examine their emotions know the APA is teaching poison that doesn't help anyone, but is in fact going to make our problems worse. So what's the upshot of all this? Well, there is plenty of good news. We live in an age of information. You can learn logic. You can use technology built on logic to research the very laws of logic that govern how this very technology works. We have more knowledge at our fingertips than the geniuses who invented logic could ever dream of. There's no reason why you can't right now begin to learn how to spot subjective claims and emotional manipulation. You are not trapped in a world of subjective feeling. You can actually find reality. Even if you hate math and science, anyone with an IQ of average or above has the capability. You only need the desire to act upon it. Now, we've seen what generations of avoiding reason has brought us to. And if you look in history, our culture has always flourished when people have clung hardest to reason. If you are watching this video and if you understand this message I'm saying, you have the ability right now to learn the fundamental rules of logic. And you have the ability to learn the basic fallacies that are out there. It's simple language. You can do it. Now, you won't always spot them when they're used on you. Even logicians who study for years can miss fallacies. But each one you do spot is one more error that you can remove from your thinking. And the more everyone removes error from their thought, the better society will be as a whole, except for those who want to control you. But ask yourself this: do you want someone who needs to blind you to reality to be the one who controls your life? Because I certainly don't want that.